Hey guys, Ellie here, and today I want to talk less about my disability and more about the reason I was disabled, which, as you know, if you've watched my motivational speech drawing on my brain surgery story, is a progressive brain disease causing seizures. Editing Ellie here, I actually meant became disabled. I know that a lot of people don't really understand how seizures impact you, and that's what I want to clear up today. It's focusing mostly on my experience, but also thinking a little bit about the experience of other people I've spoken to who've had similar stories to mine. The first is seizures only affect you while you're having them. This isn't true. It couldn't be more wrong. I wasn't even having the kind of seizure that gets you dropped on the ground and tonic-clonic, if you know what that is. I was just having partial twitches, or absent seizures, where I wasn't aware of what was going on around me. I was having the kind that made me really zone out of what was going on. And it didn't end when I stopped having seizures. I would have a seizure and then I'd spend pretty much the rest of the day just completely unaware of what was going on around me, because my brain would stop functioning. Unfortunately, having seizures every day did mean I was actually zoned out all of the time. I would say that the fact I was having 60 seizures a day by the end of my progressive brain disease also definitely impacted me, but seizures definitely changed how I functioned outside of the time I was actually having them. Not only did they make everything foggy and make me too nervous to hold a conversation with anyone because I didn't want to have a seizure in front of people, the medications I was on made everything so much worse, so much foggier. I really had no idea what was ever going on around me. I actually distinctly remember one time where I tried to walk in front of a car just because I didn't register what was happening. I also don't really remember much of the time that I was having seizures now, which says something about how zoned out I was. If you're thinking about a zen, peaceful kind of zoned out, that's not at all what it is. It's a stressful, overwhelming, I don't know what's going on around me kind of zoned out. It's really bad. And the worst part is, if you know that you can't actually register information properly, which I did. I used to watch the same movies on repeat all day because I couldn't even process new information from new movies. I knew that I wasn't taking in anything that was going on around me. When I did make it to school, which was very rare, I wasn't learning anything. And that's a horrible thing to know, because it's not something you can fix. The second thing I think a lot of people believe that just isn't true is the only kind of seizure is the kind where you fall on the floor and start twitching. The convulsive kind. It's just not true. I never actually had one of these in the 7 years that I was having seizures. My first seizure was an absent seizure, where I just knew what was going on around me, but I couldn't respond to any of it. I couldn't make my legs do anything other than what they were doing of their own accord, and I couldn't respond to the questions being asked of me. That was actually a really scary seizure for me, because during that one, it was not only my first, but I walked away from my family and into traffic. And I couldn't stop myself, or ask for help, tell them what was going on. Of all the seizures I ever had, that was probably one of the worst. Absent seizures, for me, tended to just be about knowing what was happening around me, but not being able to do anything about it. It's not so much a, I don't know what's going on during this seizure, as I just can't change anything that I'm doing. For me, that was probably more stressful. I got quite used to having partial seizures, which were just when part of my body would twitch. Usually mine were quite focused on head twitching. Since the disease was coming from only half of my brain, my seizures were always focused to one side, left, which is now my affected side from my surgery. I used to have head twitches, rapid blinking, sometimes my mouth would twitch, and sometimes my arm would come into it. They were small, usually not hugely noticeable to someone who didn't know what was going on. If I looked down, I could sometimes disguise it just as blinking. I was very used to having them in day-to-day life. Honestly, adapting to not having them after my surgery was quite weird. The other thing that I don't think people expect is just quite simply the emotional impact. I always came across as very happy during the time I was having seizures. That's because it was the only emotion I could really feel anymore. I would convince myself I was happy, when the reality is I hadn't been feeling anything for a very long time, simply because I was having so many seizures, I was on so many medications, that I was a blank canvas. I've mentioned briefly before that I also didn't talk to people at all while I was having seizures. That extended outside of seizure time, as everything did. I pretty much stopped holding conversations for the entire time I had progressive brain disease, because seizures were that much worse when people were watching. I didn't want to risk having seizures in front of people, so it was easier just not to talk. That meant that after my brain surgery, when I was no longer having seizures, I actually had forgotten how to hold a conversation and had to relearn. There is so much impact outside of just the seizure time when you're having seizures. I understand that the brain is complex and difficult to understand, and if you haven't witnessed or experienced a progressive brain disease or anything like that firsthand, then you're probably not going to be able to fully understand. But I really hope that through telling you how it feels, I can help break some of the stigma around seizures, because they are definitely not understood.